welcome to the Fallon Forum. Good to have you here today, folks. Little Beatles tune to kick us off. Why not something a little bit nostalgic? We are going to talk with attorney Joseph Glazebrook today and Dr. Charles Goldman in the studio as well. We have a little bit of a roundtable going here. We're going to be talking about the Supreme Court case Greece versus Galloway. And no, not the country Greece, the dude Greece. Anyway, we'll also be talking about the situation at Iowa State University last week, the tragic shooting, the chase, what was right, what was wrong about that. We've got plenty of ground to cover just of those two topics. But I got to tell you, the Tweed ride was a blast. I don't know how many of you got to participate in the Tweed ride, but you know the Tweed ride is funny. People get dressed up. Basically, people get dressed up like me and go on a bicycle. I mean, and here's a couple shots of me having a great time with the Tweed ride this past weekend. Oh, Maddie's saying 1 second now. You know what that means? That usually means 5 seconds because she's so slow.
Well, she has to take out the ones with you riding just with the hat on.
We decided to take a detour on the way to the Tweed ride, and that involved a railroad track, and that was fine until a train was coming at us.
Nice socks there, Ed.
Yeah, well, the socks are the Union Jack. That's the British Empire. But this is an Irishman trampling the British Empire underfoot, yes, while enjoying a cup of tea while the train rolls by. And this tea, I'm not making this up. Fallon's tea. Who knew that my family could finally figure out how to do something useful? We actually make tea now, Charles.
I didn't know that.
I didn't know it either. I just discovered
you grew on the farm in
that's right.
In Ireland.
Yeah,
I didn't think that was a good climate for tea growing.
It's called ditchweed there in Ireland. Anyway, Tweed ride was a blast. Yeah, it was a very nostalgic event for me. Anyway,
where does this ride go to?
It goes a total of 1 mile from one pub to another to a party.
Because it looked like you were downtown Des Moines.
Well, no, we were off on the east side on the railroad tracks. It was we took a 15-mile detour getting there.
Really?
Well, you needed to get some exercise out of it.
Exactly.
Anyway, I'm sorry, a mile bike ride is not exercise. Anyway, all right. So, Greece versus Galloway. I'm familiar with some of the stuff going on at the Supreme Court, relevant to campaign finance, relevant to abortion. Greece versus Galloway has escaped my recognition until Joseph Glazebrook brought it to my attention. Joseph, what exactly is this case, and why should we care?
Well, Greece versus Galloway is the court's most recent Establishment Clause case, and basically what it is, it's a city in New York, in rural New York, called the City of Greece, would open up their city council meetings with a prayer before the meeting. And it was a pretty sectarian prayer. For about 10 years or so, a exclusively Christian minister of some sort would come in and they'd offer some sort of prayer. They would use a very specific language, references to Jesus, references to the Holy Ghost, that sort of thing. And eventually a Jewish woman attended the city council meeting, and later an atheist attended. And these two folks decided that, this is not comfortable. How can I expect to have a fair chance to engage in my civic ambitions when the city council has a religion that's different than mine, and in which they are expressing a positive viewpoint in immediately prior to taking up the business of the city. So these two individuals sued, and 6-7 years later, it's finally ended up at the U.S. Supreme Court.
So did it lose at the district level?
Yes, actually, the district court actually upheld the city's practice, and then in the Circuit Court of Appeals, the Court of Appeals reversed the district court. So going into it, the city is on the losing side, and the two women are on the winning side, but that doesn't really mean much in the Supreme Court.
Okay, so the next level up to the Supreme Court was appealed by the city.
That's right.
Interesting. Yeah. I don't know whether you've been following this.
Oh, I hadn't been, but I did do some reading on it today. And one of my favorite things about the Supreme Court case is that the session that opened with this case
I see where this is going.
was, of course, preceded by
right.
a reflection involving talking about God bless America and this wonderful court.
But not Jesus specifically.
Not
right.
Jesus specifically, that's correct.
And that's the distinction, Ed, because there was a case back, I think it was 1970, I don't remember the exact year, that basically said that in the context of legislative prayer, this is Marsh versus Chambers, you may open a legislative session with a prayer as long as it's non-sectarian, as long as it's not overly coercive in its language and that sort of thing. And so the court has for a long time upheld these sort of generalized anything goes sort of prayer sessions where you can have one day maybe a Catholic could come in and give a prayer. The next day a Jewish minister could come in and give a prayer, and so forth. But the court has never authorized a very specific sectarian prayers, and so that's why this case is interesting.
So did the city council refuse to allow any other denominational prayers?
Well, up to the point when litigation started, they had never had a single non-Christian prayer. But interestingly, I'm guessing on the advice of counsel, they
picked
changed
the Wiccan. They picked the Wiccan.
They had a
Wiccan as,
no way.
for diversity. That's
and
really.
they had others come in as well. But so I think the lawyer probably sat him down and say, hey, you guys got to broaden your horizons here, otherwise we're going to lose. Of course, the courts have been not particularly concerned about what they were doing after litigation ensued. They were concerned about the practice beforehand.
Well, part of what happened here was that evidently this minister came in and asked everyone to stand up and bow their head. And both this atheist woman and the Jewish woman felt very uncomfortable that was not something they wanted to do. And to some degree, I don't know, I have a lot of trouble with these cases because to some degree it's kind of whining to me. I mean, okay, so they're saying these prayers. And it's mostly about that they were made to feel uncomfortable. And as the atheist woman who's in, one of the two women who brought the case says, she felt vilified and 1,000 eyes looking at her. And I don't know. I mean, I understand their point, and I agree that it's not the role of government to, favor or establish one religion over another. I'm not really clear why these meetings have to start with any sort of religious reflection.
Again, the Iowa legislature does it every day, and it's primarily Christian. But if you want to get in there and bring your rabbi in, I brought some interesting people in there when it was my turn to bring in a. Well, I mean, I asked Joseph. I
mean, how strongly do you feel? I mean, this is a case in the Supreme Court.
I feel very strongly about this issue. I'm a little bit unhappy that it's in the current Supreme Court, but that being said, I think it's an extremely important issue. I think it's one of the primary issues that led to the founding of this country, frankly. And let me give you a hypothetical to illustrate why this is so important. Suppose you are a gay man or a gay woman, and you're trying to get the city council to adopt a resolution for non-discrimination within the city, which was very common until a state might pick up that same legislation. In fact, before we had our state Civil Rights Act include LGBT discrimination, many cities adopted such policy. Now, let's say you have a city council opening with a prayer by an individual who goes on to criticize homosexuality as part of his religious belief system. How fair do you think of a shot you can have with the city council after this individual gets up and gives a prayer?
What if they're all Methodists? That's not really what they're saying. They were saying that these prayers were not of that type. These were just prayers, talking about reflection and aid in our deliberations.
Well, they certainly weren't that specific, but they were very specific. They were very sectarian, and they were referencing Jesus and referencing the Holy Ghost. And for a Jewish person who doesn't believe in the divinity of Jesus or the Holy Ghost, that could be a very uncomfortable prayer. And so when everybody else in the room is standing and bowing their heads, and you're sitting there not participating, and the city council looks over at you and sees you not participating, do you really feel like you're on an equal playing field with all the other civic participants in the city council? Probably not.
It's a good point. Hey, folks, if you'd like to join the conversation, we're talking about the Grease versus Galloway case before the U.S. Supreme Court regarding a city council's right relevant to prayer before a meeting. Later in the program, we're going to talk about the tragedy at Iowa State University involving a high-speed chase ending in death. I do want to take a second to thank the Iowa chapter of the Sierra Club and also Iowa Physicians for social responsibility. I want to thank Gateway Market and Cafe, and I made it to Gateway Market in the middle of a blizzard today, but glad I did. There's always a run on a grocery store. Well, Gateway, they're pretty well stocked, and again, a great place for groceries, but also for breakfast, lunch, and supper. Check them out, folks. They're our neighborhood grocery store at 20th and Woodland in Sherman Hill neighborhood. I want to also thank N-Touch Therapy Services. That's Kim Foley's business. Give her a shout at 979-8629. 979-8629 for, if you're a first-time customer, a full hour-long massage for just $40. And I also want to thank Hawk Restaurant at East 5th and Walnut. 95% of the food you eat at Hawk Restaurant comes from local farms. Check them out in the East Village. Okay, back to our conversation, and we've got phone calls coming in. Any final remarks, folks, before we go to the lines?
Well, my understanding is that this issue has already been adjudicated previously at the level of national and state government. And one of the questions is, does this principle, again, of non-establishment of religion apply in this case? I mean, I think that's a very specific legal issue in this case.
Well, I think it's this case is more specific than that. I think it goes to whether prayers of this particularly single-minded nature are constitutionally appropriate. And frankly, some observers have noted that this might not, maybe indeed this has been litigated previously, and it's not that significant of a case. But some observers have said that this might be a way that the conservatives on the court might be able to loosen the prior doctrines related to the Establishment Clause and give more leeway to government to engage in sectarian prayer activities.
So it might go against the direction that the gal who filed the suit in the first place wanted it to go.
Exactly.
No, see, and I got to admit, Joseph, I don't have. This one doesn't do a lot for me. And again, I was at the State House for 14 years. We started off every day with a prayer. I didn't notice that the legislation we passed was any better or worse, depending on what the content of the prayer was. And sometimes these were prayers by pastors who were noted to be very anti-gay, or who knows, some other very specific perspective that might have conflicted with the interests of some of the folks listening to the debate that day. I don't know. I never really saw a conflict. So I'm not sure. I'm kind of with Charles on this. I'm not sure to me, it's not that big a deal, but I remain to be convinced.
Well, what's even worse is if Joseph is right and they basically teed up something for these justices to, in fact, limit the Establishment Clause. This would be horrible for this case.
Right. It would be bad for this case and bad for other cases. But I would just say that I think your thoughts on legislative prayer and other types of prayer might be colored by the fact that my understanding is you're a Christian of some sort. I could be wrong about that.
I know. I think the of some sort is an appropriate description.
Sure. At least you're a believer. I think if you were an atheist, you might feel differently. I myself am an atheist, and I get pretty offended when I walk into my government and see them engaging in a religious practice that I don't think has any place.
This is good. We have an atheist, a Christian, and a Jew all debating.
Well, actually, I would say a cultural Jewish atheist. And so, I understand the legal issue, but I kind of go along with Ed, which is I think this is such a weak case to be arguing at this level. I mean, mostly when you read the interviews with these two women, it was their embarrassment and their feeling of isolation that kind of drove them here. It wasn't so much that they felt that the council was going to decide issues against them because of this.
Isn't that something? Isn't that shouldn't our government make its citizens feel welcome to participate in the civic process?
Well, we've got an old friend on the line here, Charles. We have not heard from Frank for a while. I think you just
we stir him out of the woods.
Well, one of you does. I'm not sure it's you or Charles. All right, Elvis's love child. Welcome to the Fallon Forum. Frank from Des Moines, how you been?
Pretty good, Ed. How are you?
Thank you very much. Very, very good.
Well, for once, Charles hit it right on the nail.
For once, notice that.
I thought you said I usually do.
Well, it usually takes you 2 or 3 tries. But first swing, you knocked it right out of the park. They're a bunch of whiners. I mean, why does everything we do in this country got to hinge on what the LGBT knuckleheads think?
Well, then none of them, as far as we know, are LGBT, Frank.
Right.
LGBT, whatever they call themselves.
They just may have been heterosexual Jewish women and an atheist woman.
Yeah. Well, like I say, I mean, why does everything have to hinge on their feelings?
Frank, let me ask you a question. If you were in a town in which a Muslim clergy person gave the prayer every single day at every single city council meeting, would you feel like a welcomed member of that community?
I have no problem with a Muslim offering a prayer.
Every single day at the city council?
Wanting to kill the infidel.
Okay.
I mean, listen, you guys, it's like McCoy said, choose not to be offended.
Okay, but you didn't really answer Joseph's question. I mean, if every day, you went to the city council meeting, so every week is more like that. You went every week because you're concerned about, stuff affecting your community, and every week there's an imam leading a Muslim prayer.
Because if he's an atheist, I'm guessing he's not wanting a Muslim prayer there any better than he's wanting a Christian prayer. So he's asking me
No, but how would you feel? How would you feel in that circumstance? As a devout Christian of a much more right-wing perspective than my Christianity.
Well, like I say, I don't necessarily have any problem with a Muslim prayer, but
Then you went into something about infidels. I didn't get that part.
well, if they're wanting to kill the infidels in their prayer.
So you do draw a line between how specific and how dogmatic the prayer is. If it's too dogmatic, that's problematic. But if it's general and pluralistic, that's okay. That's all I'm saying.
You guys are trying to take God out of every avenue of this society. How has that been working for you? You knock prayer out of the schools, and the schools are full of drugs, condoms, needles. I mean, the schools is full of gang violence, tattoos, piercings. Our incarceration level is terrible in this country.
Wait, you just put tattoos and piercings in the same category as drugs, and what was the other one?
And condoms. Needles.
Well, I'm talking about our school system.
Okay.
I mean, our school system is in the toilet, and and we've taken prayers out of the schools, and it's been working so darn well.
Well, Frank, first of all, this is a discussion of what the Constitution authorizes. So the utility argument isn't really relevant. We're asking what the Constitution authorizes. That being said, I don't think there's a correlation between.
The Constitution was all about freedom of religion, not freedom from religion.
Well, of course, it says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. So clearly, that's a restriction on.
That's not. You're still missing the point. I'm saying freedom of religion. That means that you can practice your religion as your conscience dictates to your God. There's nothing in the Constitution that says freedom from religion. So these tests and all this red herrings that your side always throws up is a baloney argument.
I don't know. Your side. I mean, Charles and I are kind of disagreeing with Joseph on some of this. Frank, I've got to run to a break soon. Good to see you again. And thank you. We'll try to continue with that thread, but I got to run to a break, Frank. Thanks for the call.
Right. Thank you, Ed.
Last comments, Joseph?
Yeah, I'd just like to close by reading a segment of the Treaty of Tripoli, which was ratified by the United States Congress in 1797. Article 11 of that treaty says, quote, "As the government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion," and it goes on to talk about some other things. So basically, the Congress in 1797 was acknowledging that although many states have Christian traditions, this is not a Christian country. The whole purpose of the First Amendment was to take government and take religion and separate them. And so when we get into this business about having prayer right before a government meeting, we're really violating the spirit of the founders.
Anyway, it's the most interesting thing that I've learned here is that this might actually backfire on those of us who tend to love freedom and value that separation of church and state. I mean, it could backfire. We'll see. When will we know?
We'll probably know by January, February.
Okay. All right. Hey, we've got to switch gears here before we wrap up this conversation. The Iowa State University was the site of a most unfortunate tragedy last week, one that is not still being talked about extensively here in Iowa, but has generated quite a lot of national buzz as well. And everybody knows the details by now, of course. The question that comes to my mind, or the questions that come to my mind are, one, was the chase even, why should the Ames Police Department even have initiated such a chase? Two, what was the driver thinking? I'm not sure anybody really knows. And three, was the officer justified in firing the shots that killed that driver? There are plenty of legal ramifications to this as well, but certainly all sorts of other policy ramifications.
Well, I mean, the thing that's most troubling was if you read the paper on Friday or Saturday, it said that they thought it would be months before they would come to some determination as to what happened. And then the next morning, you wake up and it says officer cleared.
Yeah, I share that criticism. I think that if you're going to have a reliable investigation that the public can trust in, you shouldn't. First of all, you shouldn't have the official who's in charge of defending the police officer in court come out the next day and say he's cleared. And second of all, you should probably let the DCI, the Department of Criminal Investigation, which is a state agency not affiliated with the local police department, actually do their work before you come out with that kind of a statement.
Yeah. Well, because, there are obvious questions here. The argument they made is that he was wielding the truck as a deadly weapon. But if that was the issue, why not just disable the truck?
Right.
It was disabled at that point.
Well,
wasn't it?
They claimed that they said the motor was still running, And both of the police cruisers were evidently damaged enough that they were claimed to be disabled. But if your concern was that he was going to take off and once again, endanger other people, disable the truck. Instead of shooting him, shoot the tires out on the truck. I mean, I didn't understand.
Yeah.
And I think this is, as we said at the beginning, this is what, these are people who are trained to wield weapons. Okay? And they were amped up from the chase. And you react in the way of someone who's amped up and energized by what happened. And we live in a country where how many states have stand your ground laws, saying that basically people who aren't trained to wield these weapons are expected somehow to act in a reasonable and safe way. Instead, in fact, they tell you don't have to anymore. Right. Just stand your ground.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one question that hasn't been answered in my mind. Why couldn't the police officer disable the vehicle by shooting the tires? I mean, I see people post that question online, but I never see any sufficient answer to that question. The other big question that you alluded to earlier is whether or not the police should have even engaged in this chase in the first place.
Right, that's a fundamental question.
The supervisor on the dispatch log clearly told this officer, to back off twice before they made it to campus. And he didn't. He kept following it. And probably because of what you said, Doctor, was just that he's amped up at the time. He's on a lot of adrenaline. He doesn't want to let this guy go because, that'd be sort of a personal failure in his emotional mindset right there in the thick of it. And so he follows him onto campus. And sure enough, that chase had to end in some way. And, by golly, I think the officer wasn't going to let it end in any way that it ended the way it did. Not much more to say.
The guy who was killed was definitely using his car as a weapon. I mean, it's probably just simply a stroke of luck that he did not run down anyone on campus.
Right, but in many of these high-speed chases, it's the police trailing the person that they are following who injure people.
Right.
Because
and I don't think anybody's excusing what the driver of the vehicle did. I mean, this guy, if he had lived, I think he should be looking at multiple charges like eluding and endangering the public and I don't know what charges exactly, but the prosecutor would find some appropriate charges and the guy would be spending some time in prison for what he did. But that's not what those of us who criticize the police conduct here are saying. We're not saying that the driver did nothing wrong. We're saying that he didn't do enough wrong to warrant getting shot at the end of it.
Was there any, I've seen nothing to indicate that they had any belief that he was armed.
Right. I don't think
No, he wasn't armed.
Well, no, but I mean that they weren't even operating under that assumption that he was armed.
I believe that's right.
Folks, if you'd like to join the conversation, 244-0077. If you are listening live, it's 244-0077. Speaking of high-speed chases, and again, I like what you said. I like what you said about adrenaline. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know you're rushing down the highway to get to an emergency surgery. You're doing 80, 85 miles an hour. Well, or probably not, but but when you're in a car and the car is moving really fast, there is a certain adrenaline rush to that. And I can see how when you're in pursuit of somebody in a situation like that, it could be a huge influx of chemicals into your bloodstream that could make you do something that you might not rationally do in a different set of circumstances.
Well, once again, ironically, just a couple of days before this occurred, in the same paper, in the Des Moines Register, they were talking about the technology of basically tagging these cars with a GPS. That there was evidently one state patrol cruiser that's equipped to be able to fire some sort of GPS dart. At your car, and then you stop the chase because then you know where the car is.
What about firing it with a drone?
That'll be next. Yeah. Well, remember, they're still banned from U.S. airspace, at least for the next
except
month
for surveying agricultural land for chemical.
And for that matter, the Ames Police Department had this guy identified. I mean, you can tell that from the radio of the chase as well, and so that's why the supervisor on the dispatch was saying back off. The Ames Police Department's own policy says once you've identified the suspect in a police chase, you should back off so as to not endanger the public. So those are some serious questions that need to be answered, and I don't think that this county attorney did anybody any service by coming out with that statement so soon and saying that he did nothing wrong.
Yeah. So,
what would be your expectation that there's going to be a civil suit here for wrongful death?
If the family is smart, 99%. It's a very in my book. I actually some of the work that I do involves lawsuits against the police for excessive force, and this is a much clearer case than many of the other cases I've worked on of excessive force. And so I think that if I were on the case, I'd absolutely advise the family to file. And I think that they'd be well advised to seek an attorney who can help them.
Glazebrook and Moe, for example.
I wouldn't say that necessarily, but whoever
We've
that
reached
they
a new
think
low
is,
on the Fallon Forum.
whoever they think they can find, I think is a worthy pursuit.
Well, and back to high-speed chases for a second. It's really, I really think that is what caused this to happen. I mean, you wouldn't have had this guy potentially running over students and faculty on campus. You wouldn't have had police cars destroyed. You wouldn't have had all those other, all that other property damaged and run over, and you wouldn't have had a guy dead. Again, what about just you know who it is, right? You got his plates. You know who it is. Let him run out of gas if he has to, and then you catch up with him eventually. He's not going to get away,
right?
The
baseline problem here is testosterone, which is on all sides. I mean, you work for a small city police department. How often are you going to get to do this? And I think that it's hard. It's very enticing. I mean, you watch TV. That's
look
all
at
you
how
ever
popular some of those chase shows are.
Absolutely.
Every high adrenaline movie in the U.S. has
ever
has
since
a chase
Bullet.
scene.
I mean, the famous scene where Steve McQueen runs the Dodge Challenger up and down the streets of San Francisco.
And even Premium Rush, you've got a chase scene with a bicycle.
That's right.
You know what though, Ed? I want to jump in here. We're all human, and when we see the police engaging with the guy who's endangering the public, the human thing is to think, well, gosh, yeah, the police, they were in a tough position. They should have ended the chase, blah, blah, blah. I think the public would actually respect the police more if they would have resolved this situation in a way that didn't involve shooting the guy.
Yeah.
It's one thing to use force and stop a dangerous situation. It's another thing to use peace and stop a dangerous situation.
Yeah, he's a 19-year-old kid.
Right.
Now, what do you think of this one email I've got, Joseph? I mean, maybe this is I don't know the Ames Police Department at all. This one person wrote, I think the officer was still supercharged from the chase, as Charles said. And from what I know of Ames, the police are always ready to take it to the next level, justified or not. And this is somebody I know who actually is a fairly strong supporter of the Des Moines Police Department. Says, I also have never seen the ruling of justified shooting be issued so quickly. There was usually a lot more investigation to the event. And again, we thought it might take a month, as we were told, and it was within a day. So, I mean, this does not look well for the good for the Ames Police Department.
No, I honestly think the county attorney was trying to get a jump on the story and try to spin the narrative into the public kind of thinking, oh, the cop was justified because there's a public statement that says he was justified. Because a lot of the media up to that point was engaging in a fairly critical analysis of the situation, asking a lot of these tough questions. And so I think it was kind of an effort by the department to get out in front of the story and kind of shape the narrative to help them out later in the case, because they know that there's going to be a disciplinary investigation by the DCI, and they know there's probably going to be a civil case. And they just want to get on ahead of that. But, I think the immediacy of that statement was problematic in and of itself. So I agree with the email.
And it wasn't that long ago that we had a discussion about high-speed chases here in Des Moines after a chase on the northwest side of the city. And that really, I don't think that's ever been fully resolved. But we had that conversation. I'm not quite sure where that comes down. I'm not quite sure whether anything deliberated upon in that incident will reflect upon this case, a different city, obviously, but maybe.
Well, there was a sociologist in the 50s or 60s by the name of Seymour Lipset who wrote about working class authoritarianism, and he in particular wrote that the police represent that, and that the police, coming generally from the working class, are then put in juxtaposition with people of the upper class, and they very much, the upper economic classes, very much enjoy that opportunity. And in Ames, you have a classic town and gown kind of situation. So that leads to even maybe a higher degree of hostility between the police department there and those they perceive as being part of the university's community. Because here again, the university kids are going to go on to do things that are more lucrative, and this is a chance to kind of bring them down a peg.
Perhaps, although this particular suspect was
they didn't know
in and
that.
out of
Correct.
homeless shelters
Right.
and had some mental health.
Right, but I
history.
think that still leaves, you are still left with that kind of dichotomy between the police department up there and most of the people they're policing, who are going to be the students at the university.
Yeah. So I don't know what happens next with this, but I suspect the lawsuit is probably not an unrealistic possibility.
Yeah, and the purpose of a civil lawsuit is to have the peers, the jury, and the community make a informed decision about what the appropriate assignment of liability is in the context of the excessive force claim. And so really this will be resolved by the community one way or the other.
No, they'll get tried up in like Sioux Falls or something.
That's possible.
There'll
never
definitely
know,
be a
but-
change of venue.
You think it'll be that close?
Well, it might be in Des Moines if they remove it to federal court. I mean, this is a federal claim, so who knows?
All right. Well, this has been a good conversation. It's a very tragic situation. I mean, I really feel for the family of the victim.
Yeah.
And I feel for the police officer, too.
Well, I mean, the dad just
that's
called.
got to be tough on
He
him
just
as
called
well.
because he wanted to stop his son from doing something, worse with the car. He didn't have any idea it was going to lead to this.
And it's pretty surreal seeing a police video, on the website where you see 6 shots fired and somebody is dying real time. Well, at the time of those shots, it's very, it's very heavy. And you don't see that every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Unless you're a drone pilot.
Well, I suppose that's
sitting
a fair
out
point.
at the Des Moines airport.
Yeah.
That is a different conversation than what we might have with Charles here at some point. Yeah, Charles, you'll be back with us next week.
Right. We're going to talk about Governor Christie, or as Time called him, the elephant in the room among the Republican presidential candidates.
Right. An elephant among elephants.
Yeah, I'm not sure he was too happy about that.
Well,
cover.
I'm not sure. Maybe it'll encourage him to embrace a new weight loss
Well,
program.
he already has a
but-
bypass.
He's been
He's
losing weight.
Yeah, I mean, he had a bypass.
Did he really?
Yeah, he had gastric bypass done.
Ouch.
Well, that's,
yeah.
that's probably good for him. And Democrats need to lay off the weight thing. I mean, that's a cheap shot. They need to criticize him for his policies, which have been horrible.
Exactly. and as I said, we'll get an expert on that. Somebody on the ground, my brother who lives there.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Well, and your brother is a historian and a Civil War scholar.
Right, so he can put it in the context of the last 150 years for us.
All right, and also he's a resident of New Jersey, so maybe that's his best qualification.
I think so.
All right, well, we'll have that conversation. Yeah, folks, we'll be continuing this dialogue shortly. We have more to talk about. If you're listening on KHOI 89.1 in Ames, or if you're listening on KPVL in Northeast Iowa, we're going to be talking about Mark Peterson, a farmer from Central Iowa, about water quality issues, a farmer's perspective on the whole water quality debate. And then we're going to talk with Suman Hawk, the owner of Hawk Restaurant, about his passion for local foods. Why is it that a restaurant can go from zero, what do I want to say? From nothing to suddenly having 95% of its food coming from Iowa farms. We're going to talk with him about that. We might also talk a little bit about the food stamp issue. Anyway, folks, if you're listening to the KPVL or KHOI, this show is a rebroadcast from earlier this week. And if you want to hear the Fallon Forum live, it's at www.fallonforum.com. Thanks, folks. And if you've been tuning into the live program here, I want to thank you for sticking around for the full conversation. Joseph Glazebrook, my guest here, along with Dr. Charles Goldman. I want to thank Gateway Marketing Cafe again for their generous sponsorship of the Fallon Forum. I want to thank Community CPA and Associates at 3860 Ingersoll Ave. And I want to thank the bookstore at 6th and Locust in downtown Des Moines. And every month we're previewing a different book that's high on their list. This one is by our own Bill Bryson. It's called One Summer, America in 1927. If you mention the Fallon Forum when you stop in at the bookstore, they'll give you 10% off this book for this month. I also want to thank Corazon Coffee Roasters in Valley Junction. Fair trade coffee, fair trade tea. Check them out, folks, online at corazoncoffeeroasters.com. Thanks to Tally's Restaurant Bar and Catering at 2712 Beaver Ave for also being one of our restaurant supporters. Also, Fighting Burrito in Ames at 117 Welch Ave, and in Des Moines on 13th Street in the Nationwide Building just south of Locust Street. Thanks also to Diana's Wedding Cakes out of Newton. Give Diana a shout for weddings, anniversaries, and other events. Information about her business and all these businesses on the Fallon Forum website at www.fallonforum.com. Thanks also to Ritual Cafe. Thanks to Maddie Kane for producing the show. Thanks to Webcast One Live. I'll be back tomorrow.